He was on his knees on a cold stone floor, and all four of them were holding him up. That was the thing nobody tells you about surviving something impossible. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like the moment after a wave breaks, like your body forgot how to be still because it spent so long bracing. Eli could feel all four of them, not beside him, inside him, in the way that had no clean explanation and didn't need one anymore. Kale's arm locked around his shoulders, steady as something structural. Darius at his back like a wall that chose to be there. Lucian's hands gripping his forearms, and for once in 400 years, those hands weren't performing anything. Ren in front of him, both palms framing his face, pale eyes open all the way. Eli. Kale's voice was right at his ear, low, stripped of everything except the thing underneath. Stay with me. I'm here, Eli said. Stay with me, Kale said again. And it wasn't about the ritual anymore. It wasn't about the bond or the council or 800 years of unfinished history. It was just Kale, saying the thing he'd been not saying since the night they met. Eli turned and looked at him. The storm in Kale's eyes was still. For the first time since Eli had known him, completely, finally still. 23 days ago, Eli was walking home from a late shift at the library with his headphones in and his mind empty, and the biggest problem in his life was that the grocery store near his apartment closed at 10. 23 days ago, he had never heard of a Covenant bloodline. He did not know that 4 vampires had been watching him for 3 weeks. He did not know that his blood was ancient and rare, and that it read, to every supernatural being within range, like a summons. He did not know that the night a cold hand grabbed him out of the dark and dragged him somewhere he'd never been was actually the night his life started. He knows now. This is the story of how 23 days changed 800 years, and it starts the night he ran. The door exploded off its hinges. Eli hit the ground running, bare feet slapping against cold stone, his breath tearing out of his chest in ragged gasps. Behind him, footsteps, fast, inhuman, getting closer. He didn't look back. Looking back meant dying. He didn't even know how he'd ended up here. One minute he was walking home from his late shift at the library, headphones in, mind empty. The next, something grabbed him from the shadows, cold hands, impossible strength, and dragged him into a building that smelled like iron and old wood, and something else, something ancient. He'd run the moment they loosened their grip. But the hallway stretched on forever, and the footsteps behind him never slowed. Eli turned a sharp corner and slammed directly into a wall. No, not a wall. A chest. He bounced back, stumbling, and looked up and up into the face of a man who had no business looking that calm in a place like this. Tall, dark hair, eyes the color of a storm about to break. He was wearing all black, arms crossed, expression unreadable, like he'd been standing there waiting for exactly this moment. You're bleeding, the man said quietly. Eli looked down. His palm, he must have cut it on something when he fell earlier. A thin line of red across his skin, barely a scratch. But the man's eyes dropped to it and stayed there. And then, from somewhere behind Eli, one of his pursuers rounded the corner and froze. The storm-eyed man didn't even turn around. He just said, very softly, "Don't." Silence. Then retreating footsteps. Eli stared. "Who are you?" The man finally looked away from his hand and met his eyes. Something shifted in that gaze, something Eli couldn't name. "My name is Kale," he said, "and you need to come with me before they regroup." Eli should have said no. Every logical part of his brain was screaming at him to run in the opposite direction. But Kale had already turned and was walking away, and the sound of movement was building again in the dark behind him, and so Eli did the only thing that made sense. He followed. If you are new here, welcome. And if you have been with us from the start, you already know this story does not play fair. Hit that subscribe button right now because this season is going to wreck you in the best way possible. Kale led him through a series of corridors that Eli couldn't have mapped if his life depended on it, which honestly it might. They emerged into a large underground room, vaulted ceilings, low lighting, expensive furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. 5 candles burned on a long table, 4 chairs,
and 3 men who turned to look at Eli like he was the most interesting thing they had seen in centuries, which Eli would later learn was almost literally true. The first one smiled, slow, deliberate. He was leaning back in his chair with one leg crossed over the other, swirling a glass of something dark red that Eli desperately hoped was wine. His hair was the color of copper, his eyes a pale, unsettling green, and his smile had the specific quality of someone who knew exactly what effect they had on people. "Well," he said, voice like silk dragged over gravel. Kale actually brought him in one piece. "I owe Darius 20. "You owe me nothing," said the man to his left without looking up from the book he was reading. He was broader than the others, with dark brown skin and close-cropped hair, jaw set like carved stone. He had the kind of stillness that didn't read as calm, it read as controlled, like something very large trying very hard not to move. "That's very lawyer of you, Darius." "Lucian, stop talking." Lucian grinned wider. "Never." The third man didn't speak at all. He was sitting slightly apart from the others, near the far wall, half in shadow. Eli could make out pale skin, silver-white hair, and eyes that caught the candlelight in a way that wasn't quite natural. He was watching Eli with an intensity that the back of Eli's neck prickled. Not threatening, exactly. More like someone reading a language no one else in the room could see. "Sit," Kale said behind him. Eli turned. "I'm not sitting. I don't even know where I am. I don't know who any of you are, and I definitely don't know why every creep in that hallway was chasing me like, because of your blood." This came from the silent one in the corner. His voice was low and unhurried, each word placed with the care of someone who rarely bothered to speak and therefore made every word count. They could smell it from the street. Eli blinked. "What?" The man tilted his head slightly. "Your blood. It's different. Those who chased you, they are young, undisciplined. They acted on instinct." A pause. "We have better manners." "Oh, that's reassuring," Eli said flatly. "You have manners. Great. That's great." Lucian burst out laughing. It echoed off the stone walls, warm and genuinely delighted. "I like him," he announced to no one in particular. "Can we keep him?" "He's not a pet," Darius said. "I know that, Darius. It was a figure of—" "Not like that." Eli pressed both hands to his face and breathed. In, out. In, out. He was not going to panic. He was not going to spiral. He was going to think clearly and make a rational decision and— "Can I leave?" he said into his palms. Kale answered immediately. "Not tonight." "Why not?" "Because the ones who chased you will regroup by morning, and they now know your scent. You walk out that door, you're dead before you reach the end of the block." Eli lowered his hands. He looked at Kale for a long moment, at the quiet certainty in his expression, the complete absence of dramatics. He wasn't trying to scare Eli. He was just telling him the truth. That somehow was worse. "One night," Eli thought. Kale nodded once. "One night." Lucian showed him to a room, unnecessarily large, unnecessarily beautiful, with a bed that probably cost more than Eli's entire apartment. Eli sat on the edge of it and stared at the wall and tried to process the evening. Vampires were real. His blood was special. 4 of them were apparently now responsible for keeping him alive, which was only marginally better than the alternative. There was a knock at the door. Soft, polite. Eli didn't move. "Come in." It was Lucian. He stepped inside without any of the careless swagger from earlier, and Eli noticed that without the performance, he looked almost careful. He leaned against the doorframe and studied Eli with those unsettling green eyes. "You're taking this well," Lucian said. "I'm not taking this well. I'm disassociating." Lucian made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Fair." He paused. "For what it's worth, no one here will hurt you. Not intentionally." Eli looked at him. "What does that mean, not intentionally?" Lucian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It means your blood it's difficult to be near. It's not like anything we've encountered before, and we are very, very old." He said the last part with no vanity, just fact. Kale has the most control of all of us. Darius is close. Ren barely needs blood at all anymore. He's moved past that kind of hunger. A pause. "I am working on it." Eli stared at him. "Are you telling me you're the danger?" Lucian met his eyes, and for one honest, unguarded second, he just said, "I'm telling you I'm aware of it. There's a difference." The silence between them stretched, and then Eli said, "Why are you telling me this?" Lucian pushed off the doorframe. "Because you deserve to know who you're dealing with." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Also, because Kale will absolutely not tell you. Darius will tell you in the least reassuring way possible, and Ren will tell you in a riddle." He glanced back, and the ghost of that smile returned, softer this time. "Sleep, Eli. You're safe tonight." He left. Eli lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling, and thought, against all reason, that he almost believed him. Comment below. Which vampire caught your attention first? Because I know you already have a favorite. Don't lie. 3 days passed. Eli didn't leave, not because he couldn't, Cale hadn't locked the door, but because on the second morning he'd stood at the entrance and watched 2 vampires he didn't recognize loitering on the street corner outside, and he'd gone back inside and eaten breakfast in silence, and decided the library could survive without him for a little while. He learned the rhythms of the house quickly. Cale was up before dawn and after dusk, always moving, always managing something. He ran their operations with the focus of someone who had been doing it for centuries and expected nothing less than complete precision. He didn't talk much, but he watched Eli constantly, and whenever Eli caught him doing it, he didn't look away. He just held the eye contact with an expression that Eli could not read no matter how hard he tried. Darius cooked, which was not something Eli expected. Watching this enormous, composed man move through a kitchen with practiced efficiency, making meals he couldn't eat himself, entirely for Eli's benefit. When Eli asked him why, Darius said simply, "You need to eat," as if that was the only explanation necessary. It kind of was. Ren disappeared for hours at a time, and when he was present, he was usually in the library. The house had a staggering one, pulling books from shelves and reading with the particular absorption of someone chasing a very specific answer. Once, Eli wandered in and found him surrounded by 6 open texts, cross-referencing something at a speed that was vaguely nauseating to watch. "What are you looking for?" Eli asked. Ren didn't look up. "You." Eli waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. Eli sat down in the armchair across from him and picked up a book at random and decided 2 could play at that game. They spent 4 hours in companionable silence. It was, Eli thought, the most at ease he had felt since arriving. There was something about Ren's quiet that wasn't cold. It was more like stillness, like sitting next to a very old lake. He fell asleep in the chair. When he woke up, there was a blanket over him that hadn't been there before. Ren was gone. The books were all closed and neatly stacked. Eli stared at the ceiling and felt something in his chest to a slow, complicated turn. On the 4th night, Lucian found him in the courtyard. Eli had discovered it by accident, a small enclosed garden behind the house, overgrown and strange, with dark flowers he didn't recognize and a stone bench half covered in ivy. He'd been sitting there for an hour, breathing cold air and thinking about his life, when Lucian appeared from nowhere and dropped down beside him like he owned the bench, which technically he probably did. "You're brooding," Lucian said. "I'm thinking." "In the dark, alone, that's brooding." Eli shot him a sideways look. "Don't you have someone else to bother?" "Darius told me to leave him alone. Cale told me to leave him alone. Ren doesn't tell me anything, he just looks at me until I feel like I've done something wrong." Lucian stretched his arms above his head with the boneless ease of a cat. "You're my last option." "Flattering. I thought so." A pause. He tilted his head back and looked up at the sky. "No moon tonight, just a thick spread of stars. What are you thinking about?" Eli considered not answering. Then he reached over and pressed 2 cool fingers to the inside of his wrist, right over his pulse, and held them there. Eli didn't breathe.
"Does that feel like a dream?" Lucian asked softly. His pulse was hammering. He could feel it. Lucian could feel it too. Eli could tell by the slight shift in his expression, the way his eyes dropped to Eli's wrist and stayed there. Something flickering in his gaze that was either hunger or something adjacent to it that Eli didn't have a name for yet. "Lucian," Eli said carefully. Lucian pulled his hand back, slow, deliberate, like it took something from him to do it. "Still real," he said lightly, but his voice had dropped half a register. He stood up. "Come inside. It's getting cold." He walked back toward the house without waiting. Eli stayed on the bench for another minute, heart still going too fast, and thought, this is going to be a problem. He was absolutely right. On the 5th day, Ren finally told him the truth. Not the full truth. Eli would learn later that Ren was constitutionally incapable of delivering information all at once, parceling it out instead in careful, precise increments, but enough. He called Eli into the library after dinner, closed the door, and placed a very old book on the table between them. "Your bloodline," Ren said, "originates from a human who made a covenant with a vampire elder roughly 800 years ago. The terms of that covenant were never completed." He touched the edge of the book, not opening it. "When a covenant is broken, the power doesn't disappear. It transfers down the bloodline until it finds a vessel capable of completing what was started." Eli stared at him. Are you saying I'm a loose end from 800 years ago? I'm saying you are a living contract. Ren's pale eyes met his. Your blood carries the weight of that original bond, which is why vampires feel compelled toward you, why proximity to you creates effects. What kind of effects? Ren hesitated. For Ren, a hesitation was practically a monologue. Attachment, he said finally, accelerated and involuntary. The closer a vampire gets to you, feeds from you, spends sustained time near you, the stronger the pull becomes. It overrides normal instinct, replaces it with something more like... He paused again. Like what? Eli said. Ren looked at him steadily. Devotion. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Eli sat very still. And the four of you already knew this? Kale suspected. I confirmed it this morning. And nobody told me? I am telling you now. Eli stood up because he needed to move, needed to do something with the feeling crawling through his chest. Not quite anger, not quite fear, something in between that had no clean name. So what happens? He said, his voice tighter than he intended. If you, get too close. Ren's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Something that, on anyone else, Eli might have called vulnerable. The bond becomes permanent, Ren said quietly, and cannot be undone. Silence. Then Eli said, very carefully, how close is too close? Ren looked at him for a long moment. Closer than this, he said. And Eli realized, with a slow, dizzying clarity, that Ren was already at the edge of it. Like this video if you felt that last scene in your chest, and don't go anywhere, because in the next episode, Kale finds out what Ren just told Eli, and he is not calm about it. Kale found out at midnight. Eli didn't know how, he hadn't told anyone, and Ren was exactly not the type to volunteer information unprompted, but he came downstairs for water and found Kale and Ren standing in the hallway outside the library, speaking in voices too low to carry. He couldn't hear the words. He didn't need to. The way Kale's entire body had gone rigid, his hands were very deliberately at his sides instead of doing whatever they wanted to do. That said everything. Eli stepped back into the shadow of the staircase and waited. Kale said something short and sharp. Ren responded with the same quiet calm he used for everything, which visibly made it worse. Kale turned away, one hand pressed flat against the wall, head down, breathing like breathing was a conscious decision he had to keep making. Then he turned back and said something else, quieter this time. Ren answered with a single word. Kale closed his eyes. Eli retreated back up the stairs without making a sound and lay in bed with his heart going too fast and the ceiling staring back at him, and the word Ren had used earlier still sitting heavy in the center of his chest. Devotion. He didn't sleep. In the morning, Kale knocked on his door. He didn't wait for an answer, just opened it and stepped inside, which under normal circumstances would have been rude, but at this point, Eli had recalibrated his expectations significantly. Kale looked like he hadn't slept either. His jaw was set. His eyes were doing the storm thing. He stood in the middle of the room and said, "I owe you an explanation." Eli sat up. Kale said, "Ren gave you information. That's not the same thing." He pulled the chair from the desk and sat across from the bed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, and for the first time since Eli had met him, he looked not small, nothing about Kale read as small, but human, like something underneath the control was showing through. "When we found out about your bloodline," Kale began, "we had two options. Leave you unprotected and let the first vampire with no restraint find you, or bring you here. You chose option 2. I chose option 2. He held Eli's gaze. What I did not choose, what none of us chose, is what's been happening since. Eli was quiet. I notice things, Kale said, like the words were being pulled out of him slowly. About you. More than I should, more than makes sense for the amount of time we've known each other. I track where you are in the house without thinking about it. I listen for your footsteps." He paused. "That is not normal, even for me." "Is it the bond?" Eli asked. Kale's jaw tightened. "Partly. What's the other part?" A long silence. "You," Kale said simply. The words sat between them, undecorated and devastating. Eli looked at him, at this man who moved through the world like he'd already seen everything it had to offer and found most of it lacking, who was currently sitting in a desk chair at 7 in the morning, looking at Eli like he was something that didn't fit into any category he'd prepared for. "I don't know what to do with that," Eli said honestly. "Neither do I," Kale said. "I thought you should know we're in the same position." He stood, straightened. The controls snapped back into place like armor being buckled on. "Breakfast is ready. Darius made eggs." He left. Eli stared at the empty chair and thought, "This man is going to destroy me." The terrifying part was that he didn't sound entirely opposed to it. If you are watching this and you are Team Kale, drop a black heart in the comments. If you switched teams in the last 5 minutes, that's valid too. Subscribe if you haven't. We are just getting started. The shift happened on a Thursday. Eli had been in the house for 10 days. He'd stopped counting the hours. He'd started leaving his door open at night. Small things, incremental things, the kind of changes you don't notice until you look back and realize you've already moved. Lucien was teaching him to play chess. Not because Eli asked. Lucien simply appeared one evening with a board, set it up on the coffee table without commentary, and looked at Eli expectantly until Eli sat down across from him. He was an appalling teacher in the traditional sense. He didn't explain rules so much as exploit every gap in Eli's knowledge with visible delight. But he talked while he played, and the talking was the actual point. "You moved here alone?" Lucien asked, taking Eli's bishop with 0 remorse. "From where?" "From wherever you were before." Eli studied the board. "Small town, 3 hours north. Nothing there." "Family?" "Not anymore." He moved a pawn. It was almost certainly wrong. "My mom passed 2 years ago. Dad's been gone since I was 8. Lucien didn't offer condolences. Eli appreciated that. There was something in the performance of sympathy that always felt worse than silence. Lucien just looked at him steadily and said, "So you've been alone for a while." "Yeah. And you're not fragile about it. You've just arranged your life around it." Eli looked up. Something about having it named that precisely, that casually, hit him somewhere unguarded. Something like that. Lucien nodded slowly, like this confirmed something. He looked back at the board. Then he said, very quietly, "For what it's worth, you are not alone in this house." Eli swallowed. "Lucien." "I'm not being romantic," Lucien said, and he sounded almost annoyed at the idea. "I'm being factual. You have 4 vampires who are, to varying degrees, prepared to set things on fire on your behalf. That's just true. Accepted." He captured Eli's queen without blinking. Eli looked at the devastated state of his side of the board. "You're really bad at teaching chess." "I'm excellent at chess. I'm just not teaching you to win." Lucien's mouth curved. "I'm teaching you to stay in the game." The night everything tilted was quiet at first. Darius had asked Eli, carefully, formally, like he'd rehearsed the phrasing, if he would like to train. Self-defense, in case of situations where none of them were present. Eli had said yes immediately, because whatever was outside the house clearly wasn't going away, and standing there helpless while ancient supernatural beings sorted out his survival felt increasingly unacceptable. Darius was a patient teacher, focused. He corrected Eli's stance with hands that were firm and impersonal, repositioned his arms, explained weight distribution with the same calm he applied to everything. Eli was concentrating hard, running through a block sequence for the 4th time, when he stumbled. Darius caught him, one arm around his back, the other gripping his forearm, pulling him upright in a single motion that cost Darius approximately no effort. For a second, they were very close. Darius went completely still. Eli felt it, the quality of stillness that wasn't calm, the way Darius's grip didn't loosen but also didn't move, the slight change in his breathing that he was clearly trying to control. His eyes dropped to the side of Eli's neck and then snapped back up, and the expression on his face was the most unguarded Eli had ever seen it, a crack in the stone, just for a second, something enormous pressing against the surface from the inside. "Darius," Eli said softly. "I'm fine." His voice was gravel. "I know, Eli didn't pull away. He stayed exactly where he was, looking up at Darius, and said, "You can let go. I've got my balance." Darius released him, took one step back, two. He turned away and stood with his back to Eli for a moment, shoulders tight, head slightly bowed. Then he turned around and he was composed again, completely, like a door had closed. "Again," he said. Eli didn't say anything. He took his stance. But later that night, lying in bed, he thought about the look on Darius's face in that unguarded second, not hunger, not threat, but something so much more complicated than either, and he pressed his palm flat against his sternum like that could do anything about the ache sitting there. 3 days later, the council sent a messenger. He arrived after midnight, a tall, severe-looking vampire in expensive clothes, who clearly considered delivering messages beneath him. Cale received him in the front room with Darius at his shoulder, and Eli, who was supposed to be in bed, sat halfway down the stairs in the dark and listened. The message was simple and terrible. Word had reached the Vampire High Council that a human with a Covenant bloodline had been located. The council's position was clear. Covenant bloodlines were classified as significant arcane assets. As such, Eli was to be remanded to council custody within 7 days for evaluation and appropriate containment. Containment. The messenger said the word without any inflection whatsoever, the way you'd say storage or filing. Cale's voice when he responded was so controlled it was frightening. He thanked the messenger. He said the message was received. He showed him out. Then he stood in the front room and didn't move for a very long time. Darius said, "We're not handing him over." "I know. The council has jurisdiction over—" "I know what the council has." Cale turned around. His eyes found the staircase in the dark immediately, found Eli sitting there, and Eli knew he'd been aware of him the entire time. "Come down," he said. Eli came down. The three of them stood in the front room in the early hours of the morning, and Cale explained with economical and devastating clarity what the council was, what they could do, and why the next 7 days were going to require a completely different level of planning than anything they'd done so far. When he finished, Eli said, "What happens if we don't comply?" Cale met his eyes. "They send more than a messenger." Eli nodded slowly. He looked at Cale, then at Darius, then at the doorway where Lucien had appeared silently at some point, leaning against the frame with none of his usual carelessness, face serious in a way that changed him entirely. Ren stood just behind him, already watching Eli with that still, ancient attention. 4 of them, surrounding him without having planned to, without any of them seeming to notice they'd done it. Eli noticed. "Okay," he said, "so we plan. Comment your reaction to the council's message, because things are about to get so much worse before they get better, and I need you to be ready." The planning sessions ran deep into the night for the next 3 days. Eli sat at the table with maps he couldn't fully read and listened to 4 vampires debate strategy in multiple languages, occasionally stopping to translate or explain when they remembered he was there, which they did with increasing frequency as the days passed, checking on him, adjusting their explanations, asking his input on things he had no real expertise in, but that they seemed to genuinely want his perspective on anyway. He started to understand them better, the specific way each of them operated. Cale thought in outcomes. He would trace a line from any given decision to its 10 most likely results and plan contingencies for each before committing to anything. He never acted without a map of the consequences. It made him excellent in a crisis and quietly exhausting in daily life. Darius thought in protection. Every plan was evaluated through the lens of who it kept safe and who it exposed. He was always willing to absorb cost if it meant reducing risk to others, which was admirable, and also, Eli was increasingly certain, a form of self-erasure practiced so well it had become invisible to him. Lucien thought in angles. He could find the psychological leverage point in any situation within minutes and was utterly without scruple about using it, which was alarming, until Eli realized that Lucien applied that precision entirely in our favor and that his apparent carelessness was a performance he used specifically to make other people underestimate him. Ren thought in patterns, long ones, centuries long. He would say something in the middle of a planning session that sounded abstract and borderline cryptic, and then 40 minutes later, it would become clear he'd identified something none of the others had seen yet. Eli watched all four of them and thought, these are not people who have ever had to trust anyone in a very long time. He thought, neither have I. On the third night, when the others had gone to deal with various preparations, Eli sat alone at the table with the maps spread in front of him and put his head down on his arms and breathed. He heard footsteps, then a chair pulled out beside him. He turned his head. Lucien, sitting close, elbows on the table, looking at the maps with his chin in his hand, not performing anything, just present. Scared? Lucien asked. Yes, Eli said. No point in pretending. Lucien nodded. Good. Eli stared at him. That's your comfort? Fear means you're paying attention. Fear means you understand what's at stake. Lucien glanced at him sideways and his voice dropped into something quieter, something that wasn't performing at all. I've been alive for 400 years, Eli. I have never been as afraid as I am right now, and the only thing I'm afraid of is something happening to you. Eli looked at him. Lucien looked back, and for one long, unguarded moment, neither of them said anything. Then Lucien straightened up, rolled one of the maps closed with brisk efficiency, and said, Right, get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be terrible. Eli watched him stand and walk away and thought, I am in so much trouble. He was not wrong. On the 6th day, one day before the council's deadline, Ren disappeared. Nobody noticed immediately. That was the worst part. Ren moved so quietly through the house, took up so little space, disappeared into the library for hours at a time without explanation. His absence didn't register until Lucien went to find him for the evening briefing and came back to the planning room with nothing on his face that Eli had ever seen there before. Stillness. Real stillness. Not performance. He's gone, Lucien said. Cale was on his feet before the sentence finished. Since when? Sometime this afternoon, his room's empty. Not packed, just empty, like he walked out with nothing. Darius said nothing. He stood at the window with his back to the room, and the particular quality of his silence told Eli that this wasn't entirely a surprise to him, that Darius had seen something, suspected something, and said nothing because he hadn't been certain. Eli looked around the room at 3 vampires recalibrating in real time and felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with fear of the council. Why would he leave? Eli said. Nobody answered immediately. Then Cale said, because he found something. In the library. In the research. Cale's jaw was tight. Ren doesn't act without reason. If he left without telling us, it's because he found something he needed to pursue alone, or something he needed to protect us from knowing. Or something he needed to protect me from knowing, Eli said. The silence that followed confirmed it. Eli pressed both hands flat on the table. What is he looking for? The real answer, not the version you give me to keep me calm. Cale looked at him for a long moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from Eli and sat down, and this time, when the controls showed through, Eli understood it wasn't armor, it was load-bearing. It was the only thing holding the structure upright. There is a way to complete the covenant, the original one from 800 years ago. If it's completed correctly, the claim on your blood dissolves. The council loses their legal basis for taking you. You become ordinary, unreachable. Eli stared. That sounds like the solution. Why aren't we doing that? Because completing the covenant requires a blood exchange, Hill held his gaze, between you and a vampire who is already bonded to you. The room was very quiet. And if it's done wrong, Eli said. Kale didn't look away. It kills the vampire. Eli sat back. There it was. Darius said from the window. His voice was low and flat. Ren went to find another way. He's been looking for an alternative for days. He didn't tell us because he knew we'd stop him from running point alone. He knew I'd stop him, Kale said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't anger. It was older than anger and heavier. Eli looked at the three of them, Kale with his jaw set and his eyes doing the storm thing, but worse now, something cracking in it. Darius with his back still turned, shoulders carrying something enormous. Lucian sitting with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, stripped entirely of his performance since Eli had met him. Find him, Eli said. Kale looked at him. Find him, Eli said, again, harder. Tonight, because I'm not letting anyone die from me. Not like this, not without me having a say in it. So find him and bring him back, and we will figure this out together, all 5 of us. He pushed back his chair and stood. I'm not a contract, I'm not an asset, and I'm not something that gets decided over without me in the room. Nobody spoke. Then Lucian lifted his head from his hands and looked at Eli with something new in his expression, not the performed admiration he deployed like a weapon, but something real and almost startled, like Eli had just said something that rearranged the furniture in a room Lucian had lived in for 400 years. There he is, Lucian said softly. They found Ren at dawn. He was in an abandoned building 6 blocks away, surrounded by more books, ones Eli didn't recognize, older than anything in the house's library, the kind of texts that probably shouldn't have survived this long and clearly been preserved by someone who cared deeply and specifically about their survival. He looked up when they came in with the expression of a man who knew they were coming and had decided not to run. Eli walked in ahead of the others and stopped in front of him and said nothing for a moment. Ren looked at him steadily with those pale, ancient eyes. You found something, Eli said. Yes. Tell me. Ren set down the book in his hands with the particular care he gave everything. There is an alternative, older than the covenant itself, a binding, not from one, but from multiple. If you form a voluntary bond with all 4 of us simultaneously, the original covenant is superseded, not dissolved, superseded, made irrelevant by something newer and stronger. Eli stared. That sounds like the solution. Why aren't we doing that? Because completing the covenant requires a blood exchange, Hell held his gaze, between you and a vampire who was already bonded to you. The room was very quiet. And if it's done wrong, Eli said. Kale didn't look away. It kills the vampire. Eli sat back. There it was. Darius said from the window. His voice was low and flat. Ren went to find another way. He's been looking for an alternative for days. He didn't tell us because he knew we'd stop him from running point alone. He knew I'd stop him, Kale said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't anger. It was older than anger and heavier. Eli looked at the 3 of them, Kale with his jaw set and his eyes doing the storm thing, but worse now, something cracking in it. Darius with his back still turned, shoulders carrying something enormous. Lucian sitting with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, stripped entirely of his performance since Eli had met him. Find him, Eli said. Kale looked at him. Find him, Eli said, again, harder. Tonight, because I'm not letting anyone die from me. Not like this, not without me having a say in it. So find him and bring him back, and we will figure this out together, all 5 of us. He pushed back his chair and stood. I'm not a contract, I'm not an asset, and I'm not something that gets decided over without me in the room." Nobody spoke. Then Lucien lifted his head from his hands and looked at Eli with something new in his expression, not the performed admiration he deployed like a weapon, but something real and almost startled, like Eli had just said something that rearranged the furniture in a room Lucien had lived in for 400 years. "There he is," Lucien said softly. They found Ren at dawn. He was in an abandoned building 6 blocks away, surrounded by more books, ones Eli didn't recognize, older than anything in the house's library, the kind of texts that probably shouldn't have survived this long and clearly been preserved by someone who cared deeply and specifically about their survival. He looked up when they came in with the expression of a man who knew they were coming and had decided not to run. Eli walked in ahead of the others and stopped in front of him and said nothing for a moment. Ren looked at him steadily with those pale, ancient eyes. "You found something," Eli said. "Yes. Tell me." Ren set down the book in his hands with the particular care he gave everything. "There is an alternative, older than the covenant itself, a binding, not from one, but from multiple. If you form a voluntary bond with all 4 of us simultaneously, the original covenant is superseded, not dissolved, superseded, made irrelevant by something newer and stronger." Eli stared. "That sounds like the solution. Why aren't we doing that?" "Because completing the covenant requires a blood exchange," Hell held his gaze, "between you and the vampire who was already bonded to you." The room was very quiet. "And if it's done wrong," Eli said. Kale didn't look away. "It kills the vampire." Eli sat back. There it was. Darius said from the window. His voice was low and flat. Ren went to find another way," Darius said from the window. His voice was low and flat. "He's been looking for an alternative for days. He didn't tell us because he knew we'd stop him from running point alone." "He knew I'd stop him," Kale said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't anger. It was older than anger and heavier. Eli looked at the 3 of them, Kyle with his jaw set and his eyes doing the storm thing, but worse now, something cracking in it. Darius with his back still turned, shoulders carrying something enormous. Lucien sitting with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, stripped entirely of his performance for the first time since Eli had met him. "Find him," Eli said. Kyle looked at him. "Find him again, harder, tonight, because I am not letting anyone die for me, not like this, not without me having a say in it. So find him and bring him back and we will figure this out together, all 5 of us." He pushed back his chair and stood. "I'm not a contract, I'm not an asset, and I am not something that gets decided over without me in the room." Nobody spoke. Then Lucien lifted his head from his hands and looked at Eli with something new in his expression. Not the performed admiration he deployed like a weapon, but something real and almost startled, like Eli had just said something that rearranged the furniture in a room Lucien had lived in for 400 years. "There he is," Lucien said softly. They found Ren at dawn. He was in an abandoned building 6 blocks away, surrounded by more books, ones Eli didn't recognize, older than anything in the house's library, the kind of texts that probably shouldn't have survived this long and had clearly been preserved by someone who cared deeply and specifically about their survival. He looked up when they came in with the expression of a man who had known they were coming and had decided not to run. Eli walked in ahead of the others and stopped in front of him and said nothing for a moment. Ren looked at him steadily with those pale, ancient eyes. "You found something," Eli said. "Yes. Tell me." Ren set down the book in his hands with the particular care he gave everything. "There is an alternative, older than the covenant itself, a binding, not between one but between multiple. If you form a voluntary bond with all 4 of us simultaneously, the original covenant is superseded, not dissolved, superseded, made irrelevant by something newer and stronger." Eli processed this, and the cost. "For the vampires, permanent bond, irrevocable. The devotion effect you already carry becomes fixed." Ren paused. "For you, you would carry all 4 bonds simultaneously. The weight of that is considerable. It has never been done with 4. There is no record of anyone surviving it." Complete silence. Then Eli said, "But there's also no record of anyone dying from it?" "Correct. So it's untested." "Yes, but it doesn't require anyone to die."
not as a requirement, no. Eli turned to look at the other three. Kyle, who was watching him with that unreadable expression that Eli was getting better at reading. Underneath the control, underneath the storm, something that looked a great deal like the specific terror of wanting something and being afraid of what wanting it means. Darius, whose composure had developed a fracture line somewhere around his left eye, the tiniest tension that said everything his face was trying not to say. Lucian, who was looking at Eli with his bottom lip caught slightly between his teeth and his green eyes very bright, not performing anything, just present and waiting and afraid, actually afraid. Eli turned back to Ren. Ren was already watching him, as always, that lake-still attention that saw through surfaces and wasn't unkind about what it found underneath. If we do this, Eli said, if I survive it, the council has no claim. None. And you're all permanently bound to me. Yes, whether you want to be or not. Ren held his gaze. Eli, we are already bound, Eli. The question is only whether we formalize what is already true. Eli looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the others again, one by one, taking his time, not letting any of them look away. I need to hear it from each of you, he said, not because of the bond, because I need to know you're choosing this. Not for the covenant, not for strategy, for you. If you are not subscribed yet, do it right now, because what happens next is the moment this entire season has been building toward. You do not want to miss this. Kyle spoke first. He stepped forward, away from the others, and stood in front of Eli with the full weight of everything he was, centuries old, immovable, controlled to his bones, and said, I have been alive for a very long time. I have made decisions that cost more than I can account for. I have never, not once, made a decision for a reason as simple as this one. A pause. His voice dropped. I choose this because I choose you. The bond is secondary. Eli held his gaze, nodded once. Darius moved next. He came to stand beside Kyle, and he looked at Eli the way he looked at everything that mattered to him, like he was already calculating how to keep it safe, like protection was his first language and everything else came after. But underneath that, something unguarded. I have spent a very long time making sure the people around me didn't need me too much, Darius said, quietly. Because need is a door, and I stopped opening doors a long time ago. He stopped. Then, you walked through every wall I had without noticing they were there. I'm done pretending that's a problem. He met Eli's eyes. I choose this. Lucian didn't move from where he was standing. He just looked at Eli across the room with that stripped-down honesty that appeared so rarely and mattered so much when it did. I have spent 4 centuries being the version of myself that people find most manageable, he said. The charming one, the easy one, the one who makes everything lighter so no one feels the weight of what I actually am. He unfrossed his arms, let them fall. You are the first person in a very long time who seemed to want the real one. His voice was low. I choose this. I would choose this even if it cost me considerably more than it does. And then Ren. He stood last, as always, a little apart, and he looked at Eli with those pale eyes that had been reading him since the moment they met, seeing things Eli hadn't shown anyone, understanding things Eli hadn't said out loud. I have been looking for the end of this story for 800 years, Ren said. Every version I found was a tragedy. Something moved in his expression, quiet and seismic at the same time. You are the first one that isn't. He paused. I choose this. I chose it before I understood what choosing meant. I am simply glad to say it out loud. Eli stood in the middle of all 4 of them and felt the full weight of what was happening. Not crushing, not frightening, but enormous. The kind of enormous that holds rather than presses down. He looked at each of them one more time. Then he said, Okay, tell me what to do. The ritual was nothing like Eli expected. He'd imagined ceremony, candles, ancient words, something that looked as significant as it felt. Instead, it was quiet, intimate. The 5 of them in a circle in an abandoned building at dawn. No audience, no drama, just the specific gravity of 4 beings who had lived long enough to know what a permanent decision felt like choosing to make one. It began with Kyle. Eli extended his wrist. Kyle took it in both hands with the focused care of someone handling something irreplaceable and held his gaze for one long, wordless moment. Then he bit. The pain was minimal, less than Eli expected, but the sensation that followed was something else entirely. Warmth moving up his arm, through his shoulder, into his chest, settling somewhere central like an anchor being set, like a door that had always been there swinging open for the first time. Kyle pulled back. His eyes, when they met Eli, were different. Something in them had settled. The storm was still there, but it wasn't restless anymore. It was still. Then Lucian. He took Eli's hand with both of his, turned it palm up and pressed his lips to the inside of Eli's wrist before he bit, a gesture so deliberate and unhurried that Eli's breath caught. The bond when it came was warmer, brighter, something that moved through him like laughter, like light through a window, like recognizing a voice in a crowd. Lucian raised his head and looked at Eli with those green eyes that were doing something entirely new. Open, all the way open. Nothing performed, nothing managed, just him. Then Darius. He was gentlest of all, which somehow surprised Eli the most. This enormous, controlled man, taking Eli's arm with a steadiness that didn't waver once, meeting his eyes and holding them for the whole thing like eye contact was the only promise he knew how to make, and he was making it completely. The bond settled into Eli like stone. deep and solid, foundational, something that would not move. And finally, Ren. He stood last as always, a little apart, and he looked at Eli with those pale eyes that had been reading him since the moment they met. Seeing things Eli hadn't shown anyone, understanding things Eli hadn't said out loud. I have been looking for the end of this story for 800 years, Ren said. Every version I found was a tragedy. Something moved in his expression, quiet and seismic at the same time. You are the first one that isn't. He paused. I choose this. I chose it before I understood what choosing meant. I am simply glad to say it out loud. Eli stood in the middle of all four of them and felt the full weight of what was happening. Not crushing, not frightening, but enormous. The kind of enormous that holds rather than presses down. He looked at each of them one more time. Then he said, "Okay, tell me what to do." The ritual was nothing like Eli expected. He'd imagined ceremony, candles, ancient words, something that looked as significant as it felt. Instead, it was quiet, intimate. The five of them in a circle in that abandoned building at dawn. No audience, no drama, just the specific gravity of four beings who had lived long enough to know what a permanent decision felt like choosing to make one. It began with Kyle. Eli extended his fist. Kyle took it in both hands with the focused care of someone handling something irreplaceable and held his gaze for one long, wordless moment. Then he bit. The pain was minimal, less than Eli expected, but the sensation that followed was something else entirely. Warmth moving up his arm, through his shoulder, into his chest, settling somewhere central like an anchor being set, like a door that had always been there swinging open for the first time. Kyle pulled back. His eyes, when they met Eli, were different. Something in them had settled. The storm was still there, but it wasn't restless anymore. It was still. Then Lucian. He took Eli's hand with both of his, turned it palm up, and pressed his lips to the inside of Eli's wrist before he bit, a gesture so deliberate and unhurried that Eli's breath caught. The bond when it came was warmer, brighter, something that moved through him like laughter, like light through a window, like recognizing a voice in a crowd. Lucian raised his head and looked at Eli with those green eyes that were doing something entirely new. Open, all the way open. Nothing performed, nothing managed, just him. Then Darius. He was gentlest of all, which somehow surprised Eli the most. This enormous, controlled man, taking Eli's arm with a steadiness that didn't waver once, meeting his eyes and holding them for the whole thing like eye contact was the only promise he knew how to make, and he was making it completely. The bond settled into Eli like stone, deep and solid, foundational, something that would not move. And finally, Ren. He stood last as always, a little apart, and he looked at Eli with those pale eyes that had been reading him since the moment they met, seeing things Eli hadn't shown anyone, understanding things Eli hadn't said out loud. I have been looking for the end of this story for 800 years, Ren said. Every version I found was a tragedy. Something moved in his expression, quiet and seismic at the same time. You are the first one that isn't. He paused. I choose this. I chose it before I understood what choosing meant. I am simply glad to say it out loud. Eli stood in the middle of all four of them and felt the full weight of what was happening. Not crushing, not frightening, but enormous. The kind of enormous that holds rather than presses down. He looked at each of them one more time. Then he said, "Okay, tell me what to do." The ritual was nothing like Eli expected. He'd imagined ceremony, candles, ancient words, something that looked as significant as it felt. Instead, it was quiet, intimate. The five of them in a circle in that abandoned building at dawn.
No audience, no drama, just the specific gravity of four beings who had lived long enough to know what a permanent decision felt like, choosing to make one. It began with Kyle. Eli extended his wrist. Kyle took it in both hands with the focused care of someone handling something irreplaceable, and held his gaze for one long, wordless moment. Then he bit. The pain was minimal, less than Eli expected, but the sensation that followed was something else entirely. Warmth moving up his arm, through his shoulder, into his chest, settling somewhere central like an anchor being set, like a door that had always been there swinging open for the first time. Kyle pulled back. His eyes, when they met Eli's, were different. Something in them had settled. The storm was still there, but it wasn't restless anymore. It was still. Then Lucian. He took Eli's hand with both of his, turned it palm up, and pressed his lips to the inside of Eli's wrist before he bit, a gesture so deliberate and unhurried that Eli's breath caught. The bond when it came was warmer, brighter, something that moved through him like laughter, like light through a window, like recognizing a voice in a crowd. Lucian raised his head and looked at Eli with those green eyes that were doing something entirely new. Open, all the way open. Nothing performed, nothing managed. Just him. Then Darius. He was gentlest of all, which somehow surprised Eli the most. This enormous, controlled man, taking Eli's arm with a steadiness that didn't waver once, meeting his eyes and holding them for the whole thing, like eye contact was the only promise he knew how to make, and he was making it completely. The bond settled into Eli like stone, deep and solid,
foundational, something that would not move. And finally, Ren. He came to stand in front of Eli last, as he'd done everything in this story, unhurried, certain, already knowing what this moment meant before it arrived. He took Eli's hand and turned it over and looked at it for a moment, at the evidence of the 3 bonds already taken. Then he looked up. "This changes everything," he said softly. "Not a warning, just a fact," offered honestly. "I know," Eli said. Ren held his gaze. "Are you afraid?" Eli thought about it, actually thought about it, standing there in the early light with 3 fresh bonds humming in his chest and the 4th waiting. "No," he said. Ren's expression did the thing it only ever did for Eli, the quiet, seismic shift that wasn't a smile exactly, but was something better, something true. "Good," he said. And then he completed the bond. What followed was not pain. It was pressure, enormous, oceanic pressure, the sensation of something vast moving through a space that hadn't known it could hold that much. He felt all 4 of them simultaneously, not as separate things, but as a chord, 4 notes sounding together, creating something that none of them were individually. His knees buckled. 4 pairs of hands caught him before he hit the ground. He was aware of all of them. Kyle arm around his shoulders, Darius at his back, Lucien's hands gripping his forearms, Ren kneeling in front of him with both hands framing his face, and the bonds between them were alive, actually alive, humming like something that had been waiting 800 years for exactly this configuration and had finally arrived at it. "Eli," Kyle's voice, right at his ear. "Stay with me." "I'm here," Eli managed. "Stay with me," Kyle said again, and it wasn't instruction, it was something that had nothing to do with the ritual, something that was just Kyle saying the thing underneath the thing. Eli turned his head and looked at him. Storm eyes, close, all the control suspended. "I'm here," Eli said again, softer. The pressure peaked and broke, like a wave that reaches its height and simply becomes water again. Eli sagged and they held him, and for a long moment nobody spoke and nobody moved, and the 5 of them stayed exactly like that in the early morning light, while 800 years of unfinished history finally closed. The council's representative arrived at the house that evening to find it empty. The 7-day deadline passed. The council filed a claim, standard procedure, automatic, entirely based on the assumption that a covenant bloodline would read as unattached and therefore seizable on their instruments. It read as nothing. The instruments searched for an open covenant and found no such thing. What they found instead was a completed bond, voluntary, multilateral, unprecedented in their records. A human not claimed but choosing, not owned but bonded, a legal category they had no framework for because it had never existed before. After 3 days of deliberation, the council closed the file. 2 weeks later, Eli went back to the library. It was a Tuesday morning, early enough that the streets were mostly empty, cold air carrying the first edge of winter. He walked the 6 blocks alone, actually alone, which had required a fairly significant negotiation with 4 vampires who were constitutionally opposed to the concept, and pushed through the familiar door and breathed in the smell of old paper and wood polish, and something that had always felt like the closest thing to home he'd found in the city. His colleague Mara looked up from the front desk and said, "You look different." Eli set his bag down. "Different how?" She studied him. Settled, like something stopped chasing you. He thought about the right answer to that. "Yeah," he said, "something like that." That night, all 5 of them sat around the table in the house, Kyle with his maps, Darius with his book, Lucien arguing with no one in particular about something inconsequential, Ren watching all of them with that ancient, patient attention, and Eli sat in the middle of it and thought about the word home, about what it meant and what it required, and whether it was something you found or something you built, or whether sometimes it was something that built itself around you while you were busy surviving. He thought about a boy who ate cereal for dinner and worked at a library, and had quietly arranged his entire life around the assumption that he would always be alone. He thought about how wrong that boy had been. Lucien looked up and caught him smiling. "What?" Lucien said. "Nothing," Eli said. Lucien narrowed his eyes. "You're doing something emotionally significant over there, and I want to be included." "You are included. I want to be verbally included." Eli laughed. Actually laughed. And the sound of it moved through the room and did something to all 4 of them. Small, visible things, involuntary things. Kyle's mouth curved at the corner. Darius's shoulders dropped half an inch. Ren's expression did the seismic shift. Lucien broke into a full grin, the real one, the one without armor. "There," Lucien said, satisfied. And it was. It really was. The council was not finished. In a chamber somewhere in the city, a door was closing on their failed claim, but another was opening. Because unprecedented things attract attention, and a completed multilateral bond between one human and 4 vampires was to certain very old and very dangerous people not a close story. It was an invitation. Season 2 was already beginning. Blood. And that is the end of Season 1 of Bound by Blood. If this story wrecked you in the best possible way, hit that like button right now. It helps more than you know. Subscribe so you do not miss a single episode of Season 2, because I promise you, what is coming next will make this season look like the calm before the storm. Drop in the comments, what was your favorite moment? Your favorite vampire? The scene that broke you? I read every single one. See you in Season 2. Blood.